So I've been doing my regular weekly hockey podcast consuming, and I noticed, especially with the GM's meeting today, there's been a lot of discussion about the Zegras offside, and arguably the two most prominent podcasts, Spittin Chiclets and 32 Thoughts, dedicated a lot of time to its discussion. So I wanted to give my thoughts, push back in certain areas, and just sort of explain for those of you who are out of the loop. So basically last week, Zegras' Michigan goal was called back because a player on his team was offside. Now, what made this particularly controversial is that he was only offside by a fraction, something an ordinary human watching the game in real speed probably wouldn't consistently call, and his offside didn't impact the play whatsoever. The Spittin Chiclets guys mostly agreed that this shouldn't happen, whereas Elliot in particular from 32 Thoughts went the other way, and I want to address his main argument first. So I actually really like the test that Elliot Friedman uses when analyzing rules. How would you feel if the implementation of a certain rule led to a game-winning goal in Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals? He pointed out that if an offside was allowed to occur and the game-winning goal was scored, well, it would be controversial for all of history, and I agree. However, that analysis is somewhat limited in my opinion. Yes, it would be controversial. However, in my opinion, it would equally be controversial if the call was waved off and that team ended up losing. So while that analysis is important, at the end of the day, I think you have to look at a little bit more than that, because it seems clear to a lot of people that the rule just is not satisfactory. On the other hand, I've also got some problems with what they said on Spittin Chiclets. For one, yes, the Zegras goal was amazing and it sucks to call it back, but that alone is also not reason to not count the offside or to allow the goal, nor is, I think, an appeal to liking human error to be a part of the game. Although, from a personal level, I do understand the appeal of that in baseball or even hockey. The way I see it, we need to consider everything holistically. What's fair, what's in line with the rules, and how does it fit with the rest of the rule book? For one, we know the NHL does not want the game to be slowed down by countless calls, and that's why, for example, reviewing certain penalties is disallowed. I also think that there's a major problem right now where the implementation of the rule as it exists creates a somewhat weird problem. If a team goes offside but the ref doesn't call it, well, it essentially becomes a free play for the defending team. They know that the goal can be called back if missed by the refs, even if the offside had nothing to do with the play. So they can play defensively very aggressively. Maybe they can even push to get the puck and score themselves. What happens in that scenario, I'm not actually sure. But I do think that is a real limitation of the rule that needs to be considered. We also know, however, that the NHL likes to get these calls right. There have been so many infamous goal, no-goal calls, especially in the playoffs. Elliot Friedman has a good point that any missed offside or allowed to pass offside is going to be controversial. But again, it will also be the other way. My suggestion is this: give the refs discretion. Now, is there precedent for this in the rule book? Yeah, definitely. A good example of this would be goalie interference. You could get 100 reasonable people in a room watching a goalie interference call and they will not agree. It comes down to the opinion of those officiating the game. My suggestion would be, yes, offsides can be reviewed. However, the referee is only to overturn a goal where the offside player gained a material advantage from being offside. So, in this situation, the Zegras goal, yes, there was a player technically offside, the ref missed it, but because him being offside didn't give him an advantage, it doesn't necessarily have to be a major advantage, just any advantage, then the play is allowed to continue. Now, keep in mind, referees catch most offside calls. It's the rare ones like this which are largely unsatisfactory. You still call offside normally and as strictly as possible on the ice, it's just if it gets to review, there's a slightly different standard. Now, admittedly, this does introduce more consulting and more consideration time in offside reviews because the refs have to make a judgment call, as is the case with goalie interference. However, I also think benches will be far more hesitant to call offsides in cases like this, where, yeah, the player technically was offside, but they didn't impact the play whatsoever. That's just my thought, though. I really enjoyed hearing all these discussions. I don't think because the technology exists that we have to use it. That's another argument I heard. I think RA on Spittin Chiclets said that one. Listen, players have sensors in their jerseys. The puck has sensors. You could do it all automatically without humans if we're looking at what's feasible or what's possible. But I don't think that's what we want. Also, Jeff Merrick had a funny point where he talked about he could go through historical videos and goals and see how many times there was someone offside on the zone entry. I think that Steve Dangle said something similar. But anyway, this is just my opinion. Let me know what you think down below.